Hey guys, this is Eckhart's Letter. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars lore video. So a few days ago on Twitter, I was talking my usual nonsense. If you don't follow me there, I'll put a link in the description, but I was thinking about some ways to improve The Force Awakens, because although I do really enjoy the movie, there is some criticism of it that I think is unavoidable, primarily how similar it is to A New Hope. The structure is essentially the same. There's a droid with a thing who finds the heroes. They retreat to their base as an evil superweapon attacks an innocent planet. Then they go on to destroy that superweapon. So first of all, if I were able, when going into the sequel trilogy, I would definitely change some fundamental pieces. For example, I would remove the concept of a resistance and instead have the New Republic be the main protagonist faction. But if I'm limiting myself to work within the confines of the movie as set up, I think at the very least The Force Awakens and probably the entire sequel trilogy would be more interesting if the Resistance failed to destroy Starkiller Base during the first engagement. So this involves two major changes. First of all, I would remove the earlier scene where Starkiller Base is fired on Hosnian Prime and destroys the entire system. Instead, it's only ready to fire at the end of the movie, and the Resistance attacks as sort of a last-ditch effort, maybe after finding out some crucial intelligence. In the end, the Resistance X-Wings are unable to destroy Starkiller Base and are forced to retreat as Hosnian Prime is destroyed. I imagine the whole scene starting off with Hux's grand speech, which I think pretty much everyone liked, but because we've been building up to the moment a bit more, it now has a bit more menace and is probably countered by the X-Wings coming out of hyperspace with a triumphant theme. The main problem with the destruction of Hosnian Prime is that we have literally no attachment to the system. When it's destroyed, it's the first time we hear of it whatsoever. With its destruction shuffled to the end, the movie could spend more time actually building stakes. We could learn a bit about Leia communicating to Resistance members on the planet. Perhaps they're readying assets to help her with the fight, and the movie could end with a question of whether they actually got off-world or not. We could have spent some time with Corsella, for example, and maybe got to like her and a few characters, even if it's only 10 minutes or less of movie time. Regardless of how it's done, my point is that it adds some weight to the scene, because not only has it happened out of nowhere, but it's also partially the Resistance's fault for failing. I think this also takes some of the burden off The Last Jedi, which spent time weakening the Resistance quite significantly. If the destruction happens in Episode 7 as more than just a sort of throwaway scene to show the First Order's power, then we understand in that movie why the Resistance is already so weak, and I don't think they need to be further ground down to the point of being a very small faction in Episode 8. Later on, we could also have a moment where Wedge or somebody else thought dead during the Cataclysm shows up and triumphantly helps our heroes out. That would have been pretty cool. But again, the first main point really is that it adds more weight to a scene which I think should be weighty. It's a destruction of an entire system. Second, and I guess this isn't necessarily a benefit from a pure storytelling point of view, but it also distinguishes the film more heavily from A New Hope. The Alderaan destruction scene is good because we know that Alderaan is important to Leia and it's been set up so throughout the movie. And of course it also shows off the power of the Death Star, but we don't need such a grand display midway through the film in Episode 7 because we know that the bad guys can build incredible super weapons. The scene is really just a mirror of what happened in A New Hope, and we get the same thing later on with the final battle. However, if the Resistance failed and Starkiller Base fired for the first time afterwards, it's sort of like a dark mirror to A New Hope, almost like a what if of the original trilogy, instead of just a reflection. It does take away a little bit of the tension for some of our main characters who are on Dakar because they're not being targeted for destruction like Yavin and that planet were in the two battles, but because we better understand the stakes of the New Republic's capital being destroyed, the tension should be there anyway, and I think it would be legitimately surprising the first time when the bad guys actually strike a blow so early on in a trilogy. Speaking of, that does sort of tie into one of this idea's weaknesses, which is that it sort of ignores the traditional 3-act structure and storytelling where the good guys usually get a minor victory, then the bad guys strike back, then the good guys get a final victory. in the third part. However, because the Star Wars saga is 9 films with sort of each trilogy, I think, possibly representing an arc, and of course taking into account the fact that just generally we're working within an established universe that people know, I think this change is doable, especially if we have Rey defeat Kylo Ren and have that moment where she takes the lightsaber and Burning Homestead plays. I think that alone gives enough hope to contend with the darkness, especially because nothing extra is happening to the Resistance, it's just happening in a more impactful way. And speaking of, I do think it even makes that duel more dramatic. Imagine, the Hosnian system has just been destroyed, Starkiller Base has just fired, all hope is lost, Kylo Ren has just injured Finn and is about to grab the lightsaber. Then we get that iconic moment, and the good guys almost even the odds before escaping. The other main problem, of course, is that Starkiller Base is still around, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The First Order looks very fearsome because their major superweapon hasn't been destroyed as easily as the Death Star was, which is good because the First Order in theory is designed to sort of ignore and fix the issues that the Empire had. It doesn't need to feature at all in Episode 8, and perhaps it needs serious recharging time. I mean, it takes the energy of an entire star. So maybe it could just feature in Episode 9 as a backdrop for the final battle. I don't know, though. This has just been my thoughts. If this is something you'd like me to further elaborate on in a future video, make sure you let me know down in the comments, but I'm much more interested to hear what you guys think. Does my theory make sense? Does it make everything a little bit too convoluted? I'd love to know all of that and more down in the comments. Anyway guys, that's all I have for you today. Until next time, have a great day and may the Force be with you.